Hi, my name is Ebony Johnson, and I am the Business Resource Manager at the Northwest Side CDC. And I am happy to be here today to speak with you all to talk about starting your business. And I'm going to share my screen so that we can dive into the presentation that I created. And I'll also be turning off my camera right now. Share my screen with you. Sorry about that delay. Okay, so let's get into it. So you want to be an entrepreneur. Tips to help you get started and succeed. And so before we get started, I would like to thank Bake On Greater Milwaukee for having us here today to talk about this topic. I'm here on behalf of the Northwest Side Community Development Corporation, and we are a nonprofit that was established in 1983. We are a certified community development financial institution. And what that means is that as a part of our services, we offer a financial service in the form of business loans to underserved communities. And in addition to the business aspect of the organization, we also do community organizing, green infrastructure planning, and economic development. And the purpose of me being with you all today is to discuss the considerations for starting a business. So, what's an entrepreneur? An entrepreneur is a person who undertakes the risk of starting a new business venture. And so you'll notice that I took the liberty of underlining undertakes and risk because one, when you start a business, there is a lot of work associated with that. It requires a lot of your time, a lot of your capacity, a lot of money. And so when you think about all of the resources and energy that you're putting into a business, there are inherent risks of doing a business venture. But I don't want to scare you all. And so I also wanted to include another note about entrepreneurship, which is also from Investopedia. And so you'll see here noted that entrepreneurship can also be high reward as it serves to generate economic wealth, growth, and innovation. And before we really dive into the presentation, I'm a quote person. And so I wanted to share a quote with you all. And so here we have Effie Trinket from the Hunger Games trilogy. For those of you not familiar with the series, it is a young adult novel based in a dystopian future where the premise is that each year kids from each district have to go and participate in the Hunger Games. It's really stressful, it's really dangerous, and so there's a lot going on there. But Effie, prior to the opening ceremonies of the Hunger Games, she'll always say, "Happy Hunger Games, and may the odds be ever in your favor." And so when you think about starting a business, you really want the odds to be in your favor. However, you can't only rely on odds. What you should really be relying on is effective strategy for your business. You'll have the strategy there to help you get through it, and then maybe the odds will be in your favor. But even when they're not, you'll have a plan to kind of counter that, right? So some of the things that you definitely want to consider, or one of the first considerations for your business that you want to take into account, would be the business classification. And so there are general business classifications. And so we'll start with small businesses. Small businesses are typically privately owned for-profit entities that produce a good, a service, or a product. So think about any of the local businesses operating here in the city of Milwaukee. For small businesses in particular, this classification is based on the number of employees or annual revenue in relation to the business industry. And so that definition comes from the United States Small Business Administration, also known as the SBA. And the reason that the SBA has those particular requirements in place is due to the financial funding. And so in order to qualify for certain businesses, you have to be determined to be a small business. In addition to small business, we also have social businesses. And so these entrepreneurs are entrepreneurs who also have a cost-driven element to their business. A lot of the times when people talk about businesses, they think about the bottom line, which automatically ties to profit. But for social businesses, the bottom line is not only profit, but also the social impact. And then we have our startups. So a startup is a new business venture that aims to scale. Scalability is key to the startup model. And what startups often try to do is disrupt a current market or an industry. So if you think of some startups, for example, Airbnb was a startup. And so Airbnb created an opportunity. They disrupted the hospitality market. Prior to Airbnb, when people traveled, they more than likely stayed at a hotel. But with Airbnb, they created this option where you can rent someone's home. And so that was very disruptive and also innovative. And then also Airbnb has grown significantly since its initial launch. And then if you're not a startup, you could potentially be classified as a large business, and sometimes startups grow into large businesses. The thing about a business classification is that it may evolve over time. And so you'll have social businesses and startups and small businesses that maybe start out as each of those respective classifications, but depending on the success of their business and their desire to grow, they may at some point evolve to be considered a large business. And the thing about large businesses is that the classification is similar to that of a small business in that you look at the company's revenue, the number of employees, but because there's not a specific definition for large businesses, some other factors that are taken into consideration to determine whether or not a business qualifies as a business versus a large business is the ownership structure. Is the business publicly owned, or publicly traded, in that you can buy stock of that business on the stock market, or is it privately owned? You also want to think about the complexities of the management structure. Larger businesses, larger corporations tend to have complex management staffing. And so, you'll have maybe your CEO, and then under your CEO, you may have executive directors. And then from the directors, you may have your managers, and from your managers, you may have coordinators, and so on and so forth. And then another thing that you want to think about is the geographical reach. For large businesses, they may be operating within, for example, the Midwest. So they have a regional reach. For corporations like Target, they have a reach across the United States. So why is it important to know where you fall in terms of this classification? The reason being is that your classification can affect your ability to qualify for certain financing, certifications, and contracts. With the COVID-19 pandemic, if you all were applying for some of the grants that were made available to businesses operating, you may have noticed that there were certain requirements, and when they defined maybe a small business, they had a definition as, for example, this is just an example, maybe it's a business who has a revenue of less than $1 million, a business that has less than 5 employees, including the owner. And so if you exceeded those specifications, then your business wouldn't qualify for those grant opportunities. And so it's really important to understand where you fall in terms of business classifications. Another essential consideration for your business is the sort of business structure you want to form. There are some common structures, and we're only going to talk about a few of them today, but this list is not limited to the structures that are available for entrepreneurs as they're trying to decide how they want to set their business up. So first, we have our sole proprietors. Sole proprietors are entrepreneurs who are operating a business, but they haven't registered that particular business with the state in which they are operating in. And so the thing about formation and why it's so important is it goes back to the liability of the entrepreneur or the business, entrepreneur and the business, I will say. And so the thing about being a sole proprietor is because you have not you haven't formalized your business with the state in which you are operating. If your business were to be sued, for example, then you as the entrepreneur would be personally responsible for all those debts, liabilities, and obligations of the business. And so while there definitely are some benefits to being a sole proprietor, one of the biggest drawbacks is that you aren't afforded protections in the event that the business is sued. Another another formation type for a business is a partnership. And so that's essentially what you're thinking. A partnership is when one or more people come together and they decide that they want to work together. A partnership is usually governed by a partnership agreement, and that specifies the percentage of ownership of each business owner. That agreement also talks about what are the roles of each owner. It's a really good document to have in place because it outlines owner is supposed to be doing what, and it just really helps to keep manage expectations and help people understand what their role is within the business. And so if you are within a partnership structure, when you think about a thing like liability, and if there were to be some sort of issue with the company and maybe the company is to face suit, and within a partnership, those business partners would be collectively responsible for the business's debt, liabilities, and obligations. When you think about partnership, please keep in mind that there's a general partnership and there could also be a limited partnership. And if you choose to form a limited partnership, those particular entrepreneurs may be afforded some protections, but that honestly varies by state. So just because the word limited is associated with it, don't assume that a limited partnerships or a limited liability company, also known as an LLC, don't assume that they afford the entrepreneurs the same protections. And so being that I just mentioned LLC, I wanted to talk a little bit about that structure. So an LLC is a limited liability company, and that is one of the entity options available to entrepreneurs. The good thing or the beneficial thing about forming an LLC is that the entrepreneur is afforded some sort of legal protection. And if the business is sued, then the assets of the company would be what would be used to settle that debt. What you want to keep in mind, however, is that even when you're operating as an LLC, there could be instances, for example, if you secure a business loan where the lender may ask you to provide a personal guarantee. If you do provide a personal guarantee and then you default on that loan, even though you formed your business as an LLC, because there is a personal guarantee, you would still be liable for that debt. And so that's definitely something that you want to keep in mind as you're navigating whatever structure of a business that you choose, whatever entity that you choose to form. Think about things like a personal guarantee and how that impacts your overall protection and what that could potentially mean for you in the future. And so another sort of entity formation is the corporation. And there are generally two well-known corporation types, the S Corp and the C Corp. And with the corporation, it's similar to an LLC in that the entrepreneur's personal assets are generally protected. So that was just a mouthful about entity formation and entity selection. So you're probably wondering, what else does an entity selection maybe tell you about a business? Entity selection is not only important because of the liability aspect, but it's also really important because of corporate governance. So corporate governance kind of sounds like one of those vague terms, and you're probably like, what does that even mean? And so when you think about corporate, a lot of the time corporate is associated with the corporation or think business. And governance is just what are the rules of this business? So when you form your business, depending on how you form, you will be expected to submit certain paperwork. And within that paperwork, for example, if you file to be an LLC in the state of Wisconsin, every year you'll be required to submit an annual report. If you elect, however, to form a corporation, with the corporation, your requirements will be to have an annual stakeholders meeting. And so when you think about the sort of paperwork and the obligations of each entity formation, you really want to be honest with yourself about what realistically can you handle. If you're not someone who likes a lot of meetings or paperwork kind of scares you, or you get kind of overwhelmed by it, you may want to think about a business structure where a lot of paperwork isn't necessarily required. required, there will be paperwork for all businesses, but it'll vary based off the structural that you choose to form. In addition to the corporate governance piece of entity selection, your entity formation is also going to be really critical in helping to determine how your business is taxed, as, along with the IRS filing requirements. And so the good thing about professional services is that there are professionals like an accountant who can really help you navigate the tax process. It can be really confusing if you're not within that background. And so it's nice to have that additional support in the form of an accountant if you're able to afford those services. Another thing that I wanted to make note of, and as it relates to taxes, is that as you are starting your business, be sure once you've set up everything, please be sure to apply for your EIN, which is the employee ID number. That number is critical. It's associated on your taxes. When you file for any grants or loans, that number is requested. And so it's definitely a piece of your business that you definitely want to have available to you. And so when it comes to entity formation, the best practice would be to seek legal counsel just so that you can really understand what sort of structure is best for your business. I know that early on, it's hard to afford the counsel of an attorney. And so think about utilizing, reaching out to law schools to see whether or not their law students are working on corporate law, and if they're doing any sort of transactional pro bono work, because that could be an opportunity for you to speak with someone who has a better understanding of what these structures mean. So I talked a lot about business classifications and entity types in particular. However, you should not be limiting your research to just those two things. As the business owner, you want to be well versed in all aspects of your business, including what the industry in, what are current trends, who are your competitors, how are your operations impacted by all of these things. And you want to gather this information, and you're gathering it for your well-being, your business's well-being, but also because you want to put this information in your business plan. So what is a business plan? A business plan is a fundamental roadmap, and it helps you to identify structural aspects of your business, operational aspects, marketing strategies, financial strategies. And so you really, really want to think about all of these things because they go into the day-to-day of your business. And so you may think like, oh, why is this important? It just kind of feels like a report. It's important because it's going to help you understand what business you're operating, and in understanding what business you're operating, you'll be able to more effectively produce your goods, produce your services, reach your clientele. And so a business plan is key. And it's not only just an internal resource. The other thing about a business plan is that as you are growing, and when you get to a point where you want to sort of reach out to traditional lenders or CDIFs or venture capitalists, if you're a startup or even a small business, there are venture capitalists who are involved in the financing of smaller businesses that are not startups. But as you're doing that, a business plan is something that will be requested of you. And so you want to make sure that you already have that information accessible so that you can utilize it during the financing journey for your business. So we talked a little bit about structure, and another fundamental piece of business is financial management. And in a perfect world, the end goal with regard to business accounting would be to hire a professional, whether it be a bookkeeper, accountant, or certified accountant to help you manage this process. But before we move on to the next slide, I did want to note that there is a difference between each of these professionals. And as a business, really want to hear on you need or what sort of service you need to support your business. So I found a nice comparison between the bookkeeper and an accountant from the Business News Daily, and they published that article last year. And so when you think, you can also look at it like this. A bookkeeper kind of helps you keep track of things related to your business, and they help you compile these sort of documents. The accountant then takes those documents that have been compiled by your bookkeeper, and then they make analytical assessments about how your business is doing, how your revenue is generated, what's your profit and loss. And then a certified accountant, because there is even a difference in terms of an accountant and a CPA, a certified accountant may be able to really even dive further into those financial statements and management, and also the tax process. And so just as you are navigating the financial management piece of your business, be clear on who these professionals are, what sort of services they offer, to determine which one would best benefit you and your business. About working with professional service providers, I know, is that there is an expense associated with that. And a lot of the times as you're starting your business, you don't necessarily have the funds and the resources to pay for that sort of assistance. And so you can do things that you can do yourself to help you work through this process. And the first thing that you want to do when it comes to financial management is you want to maintain organization and detailed records. So documenting purchases and assets, keeping copies or the originals of all of your receipts. And the thing about this sort of process is you can use a spreadsheet like Excel or Google Sheets to arrange this. So in addition to Excel or Google Sheets, though, there are also web-based accounting software like Wave and QuickBooks. Those are some of the most well-known, most popular accounting options for small businesses operating. With Wave in particular, they do have a free option, but of course the free option doesn't have all of the features. And so what you want to do is, when evaluating accounting software, compare and contrast. Wave and QuickBooks are not the only options available. So what you want to do is sit down, create a chart, list each option that you're looking at, and think about what sort of services or assistance you need within your business, and see where each product falls. And as you're evaluating these products, and if you make a decision to actually go with one of them, this will be a really good way to keep you organized, keep you on top of what's going on with your with the business financials. In addition to just having stellar records, well-kept records, you really want to stay up to date on tax filings. And so here's the thing. I know that I previously said that it can be very expensive to work with an accountant, for example, but you may decide, I don't want to work with an accountant on my day-to-day accounting, but when tax time comes around, I would like the assistance of an accountant. You can definitely do that, but what you want to make sure is that when you go and you reach out to various accountants, you can tell them, yes, I have my books in order. It won't be a problem for me to present you with organized information so that you can help me with my taxes. If you go to an accountant and you have very disorganized records, they are going to have to dedicate more time to actually figuring out what is going on with your business and what's going on with expenses and what are these receipts affiliated with. And because they have to put more time into that, you'll have to pay more money. And so save yourself the money and also the headache, and just stay organized from the get-go. And then the other thing that you really want to do when it comes to financial management for a business is you want to set up a business bank account. Do not commingle your funds. And commingling funds means to put them all together in the same account. You want to open a business bank account and keep that account separate from your personal finances. And you can think of it like this. There may be people in your life, for example, who, when they come together, maybe they don't necessarily vibe well, or there seems to be some sort of friction. And you're thinking, oh, wow, we probably shouldn't all be in this situation together. Think of your bank accounts like that. You want to keep your bank account separate, your business bank account separate from your financial personal account, because they don't mingle well together. it just creates too much of a headache to be using the same account, the same personal account for your business expenses. So if you take anything from this slide, two accounts, one business, one personal. Another aspect of financial management that you should be striving for is to maintain a positive cash flow. And that could be really trying, especially in the early stages when you're still trying to get off your feet. But it is important to have some cash on hand to be able to support expenses and debt. And so, in whatever way that you're able to try to manage a positive cash flow, it's not, it's not, you're not able to do it all the time. And that's definitely understandable, but that is something that you should kind of keep at the top, that you should keep at the top of your mind, because it's really important to how your business ultimately functions. And another thing about cash flow is that when you have grown and you're ready to potentially apply for a business loan, the lender is going to look at your cash flow to determine, okay, how have they been able to keep cash on hand? So that's just something that you want to be mindful of. So we've kind of talked about a lot of the pillars, well, not a lot of the pillars, but some of the main pillars relating to starting a business. So it's organizational and financial. And then we have marketing and branding. And marketing and branding are very important to a business because it is the essence of what the business is, right? And so one good strategy to really exploring that is by developing a business brand identity, which is a visual and written, which are visual and written elements associated with your business brand. So that's everything from your logos to your business cards, your colors, your fonts. When you think about a brand and a brand identity, a place like Target, for example, may come to mind. The bullseye, Target. The red is very simple, but the name Target goes really well with the logo that they have. And so that was some pretty strategic and effective marketing on that corporation's part. And so when you think about your brand identity, the goal is to be sure that is reflective of the values and the mission of the business, and that there is consistency across the board in terms of the communication. And so your newsletter should not differ too much from how an Instagram post may look. It's those things that you want to be consistent about with your color schemes. Of course, you're going to be modifying your messaging for different platforms and different audiences, but you do want to have that consistency across the board so that as your customers or potential customers or just the general public, as they're interacting with your brand, they can say, oh, I see the common thread. And even though they emailed me or, I got this newsletter, I can still tell that it's coming from the same company. And then I do want to circle back for a second. We talked a little bit earlier about the importance of researching your business. So researching really goes hand in hand in terms of understanding what your branding is. If you don't know your business, it's going to be really hard to communicate what the business is to others. And so that just really emphasizes another way to emphasize why it's really important to do that research, understand what the business is, understand what you are trying to do, understand who you are trying to reach. And so, as you are trying to reach people or customers or prospective customers or stay connected with customers, marketing comes hand in hand. And so you really want to ensure that you understand who your customer base is. And that oftentimes requires understanding the people who are buying your products. What are their demographics? What are their age ranges? Where do they live? What zip codes do they live in? All of those things really do help entrepreneurs understand how they should be trying to reach their targeted customer base. Another thing that you definitely want to do is you want feedback. You want to know how your product is being received by different consumers. What did they like? What did they not like? And because of those factors, you want to maintain effective lines of communications with the general public. And so there's some really essential things that you can do in terms of that. You definitely want to have a Google My Business page. Think about it. When you Google a business, you usually on the sidebar, they'll have some general information. It'll say maybe the hours, a way to get in contact with the business. And if there's a physical location, it'll also include an address. You really need an online presence in today's world. Even with the brick and mortar, you want people to be also able to find you online. And so that Google My Business page is a good way for that. Websites are also key. I know personally for myself, when I'm looking at, thinking about work buying from a potential business, I do like to see whether or not they have a website. And if they do or they don't, and then also the design and all of those things, it usually impacts how I feel about deciding to actually purchase something from them. And so the thing about websites is that, yeah, you can use a graphic designer or maybe work with a marketing firm, but in the earlier stages of your business, it may be harder to afford those services. So what you can do is you can consider using website builders like Squarespace or Wix. And those are not the only two options. Those are just some of the most well-known options. And as I advised in terms of when evaluating the accounting software, do a similar exercise for the website builders. Identify a couple of options, do your chart to determine what features work well with the information that you're trying to present, and make an informed decision based on that. Another key thing as it relates to your website is making sure you buy your domain. You want your domain to be short and memorable, and you want it to relate back to your business. So if for whatever reason you can't use your actual business name, make sure your domain has an immediate callback to what your business is in the business name, if you're able to do that. And so another big factor to marketing, which I'm sure we're all aware of, is social media. There seem to be hundreds of platforms right now, but I listed some that are well known. So you have your Facebooks, Instagram, TikTok, Pinterest, YouTube. The thing about social media to remember though is that your audience may be more readily available on one of these platforms versus another platform. And so, for example, if you are a baker and you bake cookies and brownies and cupcakes, your engagement on Instagram may be different than what it is on YouTube if you have a YouTube page. And so the thing about that is that you can still maintain your YouTube page, of course, but you want to dedicate more time to platforms where you know you are reaching a larger audience. And so just keep that in mind that yes, it's important to have these various social media platforms, but there may be a platform that you interact with most or more so than others just because you have more engagement on that particular platform. Another thing when you think about your branding and your marketing, the customer is key to that. And so you want to value your customers and you want to stay connected with them. So utilize tools like newsletters or reward programs so that one, you're able to share information and updates about your business. And you can also, if you have rewards program, that's a good way to get people engaged with the products and the services that you're that you're selling. And it's also a good way to gather some information about what the businesses are. And so those are really effective ways to kind of show customer appreciation and to show the customer that you are interested in keeping in communication with them. Also, we just talked about websites and social media. And so I did want to just make a note about recommendations. Yelp is huge. And so Yelp, Google reviews, all of that. It's really important that you're able to maintain positive relationships because a positive recommendation can go a long way, but on the other end, a negative comment or review can also go a long way, but not in the direction that you want it to go. And so you really want to be cognizant of trying to have very positive interactions with current customers, potential customers, past customers. Another thing about business is, we've talked about some of the tools that you can use, some of the things that you need to think about. But people are also key to business. And so it'd be great if you have a mentor in your life who can talk to you about what this process is like, some of the things that you can expect, what are the pitfalls like, what the success could feel like. Another, thing to be really important to be really cognizant of is you want to be selective as it comes to your business. And this might ruffle some feathers depending on if people um, feel left out, or maybe they feel as if you don't want them necessarily engaged with your business. But you really want to be selective about who you are working with, the sort of partnerships that you are building. You want to make sure that the people that you are working with, that they support you, that they're trustworthy, that there's reliability and accountability there. And so, for example, if you have family members who you know that they're not very organized and they don't do well with paperwork, you wouldn't necessarily ask them to come on and help you with accounting, right? You would want to go to someone who you know can get the task done. And so that's why I say be mindful of who you choose to do business with. And the other thing to think about is, as a business owner, you shouldn't be afraid to ask questions, and you should expect professionalism and good service from the providers that you're working with. And we talked a lot about accountants or bookkeepers or CPAs. And if you are working with any of these professionals and you feel like that you really don't still understand what's going on, they're just, producing these documents for you, you can tell them, hi, can we go over this because I want more clarity on this? Or if you feel like they're not doing a good job, you can also bring that conversation to the floor, and then you can decide that actually I no longer want to contract your services. So it's really important to feel empowered in that sense, because sometimes when we don't have the expertise, when people just tell us things, even if we're somewhat confused or hesitant about it, we kind of just defer to them because they're the expert. But if within any of those working relationships you feel doubt or you would like clarification, be empowered to go to them and have those conversations. And so the moral of this presentation is to do that thing you love strategically. And so passion will get you a long way, but strategy will just get you so much further. So have your passion and your strategy to support your business. And on that note, I'm going to end here on this image where we have heart representing passion. We have our checklist, which represents a lot of the planning that you have to do, a lot of the paperwork that's involved. We have time, because it takes time to build a strong business, or it could accelerate very fast once you're established. And so that's definitely a factor that you want to think about, and how time is going to impact your business. And then, of course, money, because there's a financial risk to starting a business. And the goal at the end is hopefully to generate revenue, both economically, and if you are a social business, as well as socially. And so once again, I am Ebony Johnson, and I have been with you guys from the Northwest Side CDC. If you are interested in reaching out to me, please visit our website, which is www.nwscdc.org. There is a link to email me directly, and my telephone number is also available.